fallen nature. And there is a new order of doing things. There's a new world order. And in this new world order, the Torah tells us what's right and what's wrong. What's left and what's right. What's up and what's down.
That's the bottom line.
That's right.
So if you're going to set yourself against patriarchal marriage, because in the Garden of Eden there was no patriarchal marriage, don't let me catch you going to supermarket shopping. Don't let me catch you going to a doctor. Because in the Garden of Eden, who was the doctor? Yahweh Rofeh, Yahweh Rofeka. There was no sickness, there was no sorrow, there was no dying, there was no pain, there was no suffering. So every time you get a referral, turn to your neighbor and say referral. Every time you get a sonogram. Every time all y'all pregnant women get an amniocentesis. You can relate to that?
Yes, sir.
You're in sin. You're in sin. How many believe that Chava went to her doctor to get an amniocentesis?
I don't think so.
No.
So don't tell me about what was back then, because you weren't there.
Amen.
That's right.
And without the Torah, you wouldn't even know that there was an Adam and Eve.
Exactly. Wow. Baruch Hashem Yahweh.
Don't tell me you're not interested in the way they used to live back then. You wouldn't even know there was a Gan Eden. You wouldn't even know there was an Etz Chaim. You wouldn't even know there was an Etz of Tov and Ra'ah.
You wouldn't be here.
It is the same Torah who encourages patriarchal marriage that tells you how things used to be, to show you that things ain't used to be like they used to be, even though you wish they used to be like they used to be, but they haven't been that way, so you need a new hope.
Amen.
Amen.
Come on now.
Whatever else he said. Tongue twister.
Yahweh would never allow monogamy today as the only alternative, because paradise rules simply do not apply in a post-paradise environment.
Can't.
Amen.
Can't.
People say, well, I had this on Yaspace. This is one of the reasons I was excommunicated from Yaspace. And all y'all who know that I'm a prophet and you don't speak up for me on Yaspace, good. Reap what you sow. Keep silent. Let them trash me. Go ahead and keep silent. Because to him that knoweth to do good and doth it not, to him it is sin.
Amen. Amen. You better, brother.
Why do you think I
Baruch Hashem Yahweh.
Amen.
Yahweh's my defense.
good.
Amen.
That's
What is
okay.
that?
No, I don't need humans to defend me, but you'll lose your reward. That's all. Yahweh will defend me.
Amen.
But check this out.
Amen.
Check this out. One of the common responses is Shabbat was instituted in the garden. And because Shabbat has never changed, Yahweh rested on what day? The seventh day. So they say, hey, that's not true. You say, Rabbi Moshe, that we're not under the rules of the Garden of Eden. That's not true. The Shabbat was instituted where? At the dawn of creation, and we're still under the rules and the obligations of Shabbat. You know what I have to say to that?
It was reiterated.
Isaiah 1:13.
Exactly.
Right.
Turn with me, please,
It was reiterated in
to Isaiah 1. Let's see if Shabbat is the same as it was in the Garden of Eden. Let's see if Shabbat today is like Adam v'Chava celebrated it in Gan Eden. I said in Gan Eden.
Amen.
I said in Gan Eden.
Amen.
Amen.
Yeshayahu 1:13.
Okay.
Yeshayahu. So those who claim that our theology is incorrect, that we are not under a different set of rules in a post-paradise fallen world, point to the Shabbat being eternal and unchanged. Yahweh has something else to say. In Yeshayahu 1:13, Yahweh says, bring me no more vain offering. Incense is an abomination to me. The Rosh Chodashim and the Shabbats, the calling of Mikra Kodashim, I cannot put up with it anymore. Your Shabbats are iniquity, even all your Shabbat meetings.
Everybody go home now.
Pack it in. Shabbat shalom, everybody. We love you.
We are so fallen that even our Shabbat meetings are not pleasing to Yahweh.
Wow.
Because Yahweh knows what's going on in our hearts and minds while we're here.
Yeah.
Or while you're listening at
Oh,
home.
wow.
Some of y'all are listening at home during laundry, washing the floor.
Uh-oh, tell the
You
truth.
think
Come
I'm
on
fooling
now.
Yahweh.
Tell the truth.
Come on.
Come on now.
Come on.
Put that food down.
Baruch Hashem Yahweh.
Baruch Hashem.
So even the Shabbats have become polluted. And we need the instruction manual to tell us, don't cook, don't work, cease from work that leads to remuneration. We need the Torah to show us our Shabbats have become polluted. We need the Torah to show us the monogamous design of the Garden of Eden has become polluted. We need the Torah. Without the Torah, you wouldn't even know that monogamy was the original design, would you? And the same Torah that clues you in that monogamy was the original design clues you in today that you have choices that the state won't give you and that religion won't give you. So don't tell me how things used to be in Gan Eden.
All right now.
Can I hear a good amen?
Amen.
Amen.
Indeed.
As a clear example, after the fall of man, man was banished from Gan Eden. What happened with Cain and Abel? What happened with Cain and Abel when they were banished from Gan Eden? Who slew who? Cain slew Abel.
Yeah, that's right.
You ever meet anybody named by that name? No, I'm not going there. Cain slew Abel. Murder. I said murder.
Amen.
Uh-oh.
Yes, he did.
Who lost her husband? Who lost her husband? Mrs. Abel. Who lost her husband? Mrs. Abel. Hell, according to most of these critics who don't know what they're talking about. Write that down. If you oppose plural marriage, you don't know what you're talking. Write it down. You. I'm not talking about Chris. I'm not talking about Ray Guerrero. You don't know what you're talking about. Write it down. I don't know what I'm talking about. And if you don't behave, I'll make you read it 100 times.
Oh boy.
Baruch Hashem Yahweh. So what happened when Cain killed Abel? There was a murder.
Yes.
I said there was a murder.
Yes.
How many murders took place in the Garden of Eden?
None.
You want to go back to the garden? That means we have to live in a society where there's no murder. There's no homicide.
Yeah. Okay.
If you are saying that Yahweh does not encourage, promote, or allow patriarchal marriage, then you should be consistent and say that there is no such thing as murder. Murder has never taken place. Because in the Garden of Eden, were there any murders? No. And if there were no murders, once Cain killed Abel, Mrs. Abel couldn't remarry. Why couldn't she remarry? Because it wasn't originally designed that way. Eve was never designed to remarry after Adam. Why?
Oh, wow.
Because that was a Garden of Eden.
Exactly.
So then, since you claim that monogamy is the only approved way for all times, then you ought to be consistent and say that if Mrs. Abel married, she sinned because her husband was killed by Cain. So guess what? We can't go by what happened in the Garden of Eden, because in the Garden of Eden there was how much murder?
0.
How much divorce?
0.
None.
How much sickness?
None.
How much lack?
None.
How much lack of provision, lack of anything?
None. No lack.
Isn't it funny? Nobody wants to go back to the garden when it comes to providing for their family, shopping, protecting themselves from murderers with guns and weapons. They don't want to go back to the Garden of Eden. Were there any guns in the Garden of Eden? So Adam had to protect Eve from robbers and thieves and murderers? Did Adam have to protect Eve with a firearm?
No.
Nope.
No.
So if you want to go back to the way things were in the garden and condemn those who are righteously seeking to live a patriarchal marriage lifestyle, turn in your firearms and trust Yahweh so all the murderers can come and slay you. And P.S. if a murderer does come and slay you, that's proof that you're not in the garden anymore. Because in the garden, Adam didn't have that fear.
Exactly.
You got to be consistent. Have to be consistent.
Completely.
See what I mean, Wilbur? They got to be consistent.
Gotta be.
But in the garden, so I'm sorry, murder had set in. Now, if a man's monogamous wife was murdered, such as Abel's wife, her husband was murdered, would not, or let's assume if a man's wife was murdered, the other way around. Let's assume Mrs. had been murdered. Would he be allowed to take a second wife? Of course. But in the garden, had Adam taken a second wife, he would have sinned.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Sure.
If Adam had taken a second wife in the garden, he would have sinned. But if your husband is murdered, lady, can you take a second husband?
Yes.
Yes. If your wife is murdered, can you take a second wife?